What is magic? I'm not talking about Chris Angel style stagecraft. I'm talking about the magic with a K famously added by turn of the century sex pest Aleister Crowley. What is it? It's a question that was posed to me by documentarian Richard Metzger about 3 years ago. And ever since then, it's wormed its way into my brain and caused me to lose many nights mulling over the answer because it's such a strange question. Magic obviously is a word that has meaning. When I say it, you have images in your mind about TikTok witches summoning spells to slay evildoers, or wizards in robes, or ancient bacchanal ceremonies with secret societies. But do we mean all of these things at once when we say magic? What are we actually talking about when we talk about magic? This video is not meant to be a comprehensive overview, but rather a way of getting my thoughts in order around this topic. So I'm going to do my best to explain magic from a few different levels or angles that we can understand what we're talking about when we talk about magic. Oftentimes, what we mean when we talk about magic is, in some sense, a collection of cultural practices, ceremonies, rites that are performed and are not religious. I think there's something interesting about this usage of the word, and we should be careful to ask ourselves who gets to decide what is religious and what isn't. Why is the miracle of transubstantiation that happens in the Catholic Mass considered a religious practice, while voodoo rites are often considered magic and spooky? Oftentimes, the answer is colonialism. But magic and magical culture doesn't always have to be a folk religious practice. Oftentimes we can see cultural pseudo folk religion form. So when we see TikTok witches trying to curse the moon or put out political hits, this is a form of cultural magic. There is unifying of practice and identity around certain symbols or practices. So often what we see happening here is a sort of gentrification of folk religion, where contemporary, usually Western people will take what were ancient folkloric traditions or folk magic and sand off the cultural edges to be able to pick and choose pieces and practices that are useful or resonant with the practitioner's life. This is how we get to this sort of crystal mom, new age, social media influencer, aesthetic, altar witchcraft type vibe of magic. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. We're really seeing the creation of modern folk religion around certain collective practices. The way that many people share and trade practices like cord cutting ceremonies or anointing of candles starts to form a cohesive cultural identity. So this is just one way of understanding magic, is we're using it as a word to describe this particular practice. When I paint a picture, before that picture can become oil on canvas, it first must exist in my mind. Where did that image exist before it arose in my mind? Magic at this level can be used to describe the process through which nothing becomes something. When a storyteller is going to tell a story, there must be some initial impulse that comes from the depths of nothingness before it can form into the storyteller's mind as a impulse or a desire to tell a story, which then becomes filtered into emotions and archetypes, which then become characters, and plot, which then becomes syntax and sentences, which finally leaves the storyteller's mouth and can be communicated to the other. This is what we mean with the phrase abracadabra. I speak as I create. This is a deeper understanding of magic and the way that the term is often employed by magicians in the Western ceremonial tradition or the Hermetic philosophical tradition. So at this level, we're thinking of magic not as a superstitious practice, but as a word to describe a phenomena of emergence. We can see that desire becomes image, symbols become actions, and actions then cause change to occur in the world. This is what Aleister Crowley was getting at when he said famously, magic is the art and science of causing reality to conform with the will. So there's nothing magic about magic. It simply is a way to describe a process of creation. Everything from art to music to storytelling is, in this sense, a magical process. Creativity itself is magical. So magic is not about breaking the laws of reality. It's about working directly with the symbolic layer that structures human behavior, belief, and perception. Level 3, symbolic magic. So if we understand magic to be this phenomena of emergence, where anything that exists inherently had to not exist before emerging into existence, when we watch that phenomena of emergence happen, when we see it travel from impulse to symbol to action to change, we can start to participate actively in that flow. This is like a postmodern understanding of the first level, where instead of participating in symbolic action from a dogmatic or superstitious standpoint, we're willingly filtering that emergent process through pre-existing symbols in order to have a desired effect. So this is where we can think of magic as a formalized technology for guiding emergence. Ceremony gives structure to the formless. Shared symbols synchronize inner states across people, and repetition of symbols stabilizes their meaning over time. So at this level, we can start to think of magic not as a cultural practice or an ontological phenomena, but as a fine art with many different traditions and best practices. Just like how fine art includes periods and styles, how one can learn to paint in a classical style and then apply that to comic book art or animation, magic as a tradition is also like a fine art, like a river flowing through history with many different distributaries and anabranches and streams all breaking off and forming their own traditions, sometimes rejoining and sometimes going their own way. This is how we get to occult ceremonies like the Western tradition, contemporary manifestation thinking like the New Thought movement, or a more postmodern chaos magical approach of repurposing and reappropriating older magical symbols for new purposes. This is the level of magic where most modern practitioners lie. They are like artists in conversation with previous generations of practitioners, advancing the craft, advancing their understanding of using symbols to manage the emergent phenomena of life, or applying it to other creative ends. And finally, level 4, relational. At this level, we need to begin to decouple the ego from our experience of the emergent phenomena of creation. Rather than experiencing this process as a force being formed by a craft, we can begin to understand ourselves as existing in relationship to forces bigger or more powerful than us. In some sense, I am alone in the world entirely. I have my conscious mind, I have my subconscious processes, but for the most part, I understand everything that happens inside of me. Even though I may not be aware of my own beating heart, I at some level know that it is me that beats that heart, or what I would consider to be myself. But when I meet another human being, I can never fully inhabit the interiority of their experience. We will never be able to bridge that gap. At that gap between me and you, we are still able to communicate. And it is that bridging of the gap that we can begin to understand as magic. When I experience a consciousness separate from my own, I am in commune with something else. That is when we can begin to think of magic as a relational practice. Now, contemporary thinkers like Frater Ocker likes to think of magic as a relationship rather than a craft. This deframes us from applying the same rubric of skill and progression that we would to a craft to the magical practice. Every person's spiritual development or spiritual path is going to be wholly unique and living in a way that doesn't have a linear progression the way that learning a fine art would. So this is how Frater Acker gets to the relational magic. Another great Crowley quote from The Oath of the Abyss, he says, "I will swear to treat every phenomena as a direct dealing of God with my soul." So both of these authors are getting at this idea that we are not simply alone in the world creating from nothing, but that we are existing and having a lived experience in an ecology of other conscious beings, all having those lived experiences within forces that are bigger than even our own conscious mind. We are experiencing them, we are shaping them, and we are being shaped by them. And so when we allow ourselves to decenter from self and to experience our lives as a relational phenomena, that is when we start to open the door to magic at this level of relationship. Now, there's nothing wrong with any level, and I don't like the hierarchical framing of this, but I do it because it's presumably good for the algorithm. Obviously, there's no one way true meaning of magic, but many different authors throughout history and through our current culture use this term in different ways. And I think this is a great way of understanding what we mean when we talk about magic. And I hope that this opens the door to perhaps reading texts that maybe seem superstitious or even like fantasy at first, and understand that there is deep work happening. That when people today are doing magic, they're not simply making stuff up or buying into contemporary superstitions or trying to buy in whole cloth to beliefs of the past, but that there is a living and active philosophy, cosmology, ideology, practice that is being shaped by contemporary living thinkers who are working with thinkers from the past and adding their own ideas into the dialogue about what we're doing when we are creating from nothing. So this is a little heady of a topic, but I hope that it opens your mind a bit to some of the possible ways of understanding contemporary occult practices. Just wanted to get some of my thoughts out there. I've got another more standard essay coming up soon that I'm working on, but I want to start feeding some videos out there. So please subscribe to the channel. I've got more stuff coming up. I've been Finch. You've been amazing. And I look forward to seeing you next time.